So to kind of start this off, I would like to read this little quote by one of my favorite spiritual teachers. His name is Rupert Spira. And it says, without something to identify with, the separate self, or it's often defined in spirituality as the ego, cannot stand. It is not possible to have a separate subject of experience without a separate object. So I read that to highlight the importance of making that identity shift from believing we are a separate subject of experience, meaning our thoughts, our body, to a new identity that I like to refer as simple aware presence. So this connecting with a new identity, aware presence, really is the key to unraveling the ego reactions. It really is the key to connecting with the peace of God, feeling completely centered within ourselves in every moment, completely connected to the right path. Which, when I say the right path, it makes it sound like there is a right path, which is not true. There's only the path. And you cannot not be on the path. But when we believe we are this separate person, I'm just going to say it more simply, when we believe we are this person, this body and these thoughts, then it really feels like there's a right way and a wrong way. It really feels like there's a path. Marcus, yeah. What's your question?
Well, that was me, but I was curious.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Nicholas.
What you mean by we can't not be on the path?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Thanks for pointing that out. It's kind of like, which is actually one of the primary things I wanted to go into during this session. It's when we believe we are this body and this mind, and there's an emphasis on trying to get things right, there's a constant shucking and jiving to all the different options. And so it seems like there could be a right path or a wrong path because we see all these different options, right? And that's what our experience is. But when we become less interested in feeding all of the thought options and thought considerations in general, then what's left is only our immediate experience. And our immediate experience can only go one way. That's it. Our immediate experience can only go one way. But when we're projecting too far into the future, there seems like a myriad of options. It seems like there's a clear wrong and right direction. But that doesn't go to say that we don't plan our future. We can have a direction and goals. However, when we don't know how to let go of them, then there's an obsession with the right or the wrong way. And so then it seems like there's a path. So it really is a trusting, Nicholas. I wouldn't even say trusting because the trust comes as we let go and realize that the obsession with trying to be on a right path or go the right way is not creating the kind of experience in our life that we want to have. So I always like to call it letting go. The more that we just let go and put, instead of our attention in figuring out which direction we're going in each moment, place more of our attention in the immediacy of the now. And knowing that this is the only place I could be right now. Now, you can try this in your own experience. You can get real centered, and that's what I hope we do throughout the course of this meditation, is get real centered in a more authentic essence that we are, and see what that feels like. And then after our meditation, then you'll start thinking like normal, and our thoughts will go in all the different directions, and notice what that feels like. And then from noticing that distinction, we slowly start to put less emphasis on the old patterns and more emphasis on the letting go and connecting with our most authentic self, our essence, our aware presence, and letting that be the guide. So that's kind of the letting go process, is just realizing again and again how the old ways doesn't produce the experience that we want to live. And naturally we start to let go when we really see that. But it takes again and again coming to things like this, being around other people who can help us to connect to that more authentic part of ourselves. So that way we can see the contrast between those two ways of being, and then slowly start to put more emphasis on this aware presence. Does that kind of answer your question, Nicholas?
Yes, it does. It raises a couple more questions,
good.
but
All right.
I'll reserve those.
All right. All right. It could be questions that everyone is thinking, but keep them in your mind though, because I'm going to open this up at the end for people to ask questions. So jot it down or keep it in your mind or something. So this aware presence is really what we're taking time to connect with here. So how do we do this in every moment of our day? How do we make this the new priority? How do we have experiences to begin to see that this is what we can trust? This is where our new emphasis can be. I like to start with simple reasoning. Throughout the years, we've come to the conclusion that this body is who we are. These thoughts is who we are. But if we investigate a little bit further, we might come to a different conclusion. So this most basic reasoning, I think, can be exemplified by a fun little example here. So for instance, this coffee mug. I can see this coffee mug, so therefore I clearly know I am not this coffee mug because I can see it. And I know that there's a distance. So it helps me to know that I am not this coffee mug. However, it's not that clear when it comes to our body or our thoughts, is it? How are we going to rest back into aware presence and start making choices and taking action from that new identity if it's not quite clear within us that we are not the body or we are not the thoughts. However, whenever we really consider this coffee mug example, we can take that inwardly with our body and our thoughts. So for instance, with our thoughts, how, or rather, wouldn't there have to be something immediately prior to our thoughts that is aware of them? Meaning that just like with the coffee cup, doesn't there have to be something immediately prior to the coffee cup that is aware of the coffee cup? Similarly within, doesn't there have to be something immediately prior to our thoughts that is being aware of our thoughts? We cannot turn around, though, and see this awareness. So we take it for granted. Just like I cannot turn around and see myself looking at this coffee cup. So I take it for granted. In our thoughts, we've never seen the one who sees the thoughts, because we are that one. Just like the eyes, when looking at the coffee cup, have never seen themselves, because they are themselves. Yeah, Paul?
I just wrote a few notes down, but I wanted to, the idea of not being able to turn around and seeing who sees that coffee cup or coffee mug. I have a sense, and I'm not going to say see, I'm not going to say, I don't know what it is, but I have a sense that there is an aware presence. And how I would interpret what you've just said was that the aware presence cannot be aware of itself. And if I turn around figuratively and observe that aware presence, then I'm not the aware presence. I'm not at that spot. And I just wonder if you recall the mind triangle and various other aids in helping to put ourselves into this hierarchy of existence, if that aware presence is aware of itself, and we can place ourselves there and look out and have a sense of looking out.
Yes. So, gosh, you guys are asking such good questions. So, when we haven't made that distinction between ourself and as aware presence, and then everything that aware presence is aware of, which in this moment is our thoughts, our emotions, our body, our sensations, the computer or phone that we're looking at, the walls in front of us. When we, all of that stuff, which is everything in this moment, is a manifested object. And when we haven't created that distinction between ourself as the simple aware presence, which is unmanifested, and then all the manifested objects, when we haven't found that distinction yet, then we are mixed with those objects of experience, and as such feel like them. And then it's like, okay, then how do I know myself as this aware presence? How do I know myself as the eyes looking at the cup? Right now, and it has to do with attention. Right now, my attention is moved outside of myself and merged in with the cup. And I'm completely lost in the experience of the cup. I can't see anything else but that cup, you know? But through meditations like these, to where we talk in this way and we allow ourselves to settle, then our attention slowly pulls back from the manifested objects of our experience to its source. Our attention pulls back to its source, which is aware presence. And it's in that space that we have created that distinction. It's in that space that aware presence is aware of itself. Aware presence then becomes self-aware when it's no longer mixed with the objects of experience, when the attention has settled back into its source. Then awareness is aware of itself.
Thank you for putting words to that so well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Great question. So please keep the questions coming as we continue on. So that's what these meditations are really here for, is to allow a space for us to let go. And through reasoning, we can come to these simple conclusions that we can take with us throughout our days and remember them and have experiences with them to keep ourselves more connected to our most authentic self, aware presence. And in that space of aware presence, the most challenging reactions can come up, and that used to entangle us for days, weeks, months, or years. And when we remember, we are not that separate subject of experience. We are not the body. We are not the emotions. We are not the thoughts. Then we so slowly pull our attention away from these objects of experience, and it settles into that real self that gives us what I like to call perspective. Now, it's the kind of perspective that I've really only seen hit someone at a funeral before. Have you ever seen like two family members not getting along for years even, and then they both find themselves at a funeral, and at that space, a healing happens. At that space, they both let go because they have perspective. And that's the kind of perspective that this aware presence offers, it's such the peace of God. It's such a realization that anything that was veiling or being overemphasized before becomes second to this perspective. So in my own experience anyways, this practice of reasoning out, instead of so much our problems and the content of our thinking and all the whole subject-object dynamic, instead of that, more so reasoning out to understand experientially, not conceptually, but experientially, who I am has resolved all of the ego reactions and all of the emotional challenges and all the things I was confused about before. That stuff becomes clear in the light of perspective, which is what aware presence seems to offer. So how do we get there? It's so simple. In fact, we're all already there. There's nothing we ever have to do. This aware presence is always activated. And we always are that. However, we're not always knowingly that. We are always aware presence, but we're not always knowingly that. So how do we experience aware presence knowingly? I like to describe it as doing nothing. And you guys who joined me last time heard me use the words, stop trying to fix and change things. Become less interested in fixing or changing things. Which doesn't mean we can't fix or change things at certain times in our day, but it's so helpful to get that perspective, to oscillate from that to not being interested in fixing or changing. So our minds can settle and we can withdraw our attention from the objects, from manifested form to the unmanifested formless, which is just aware presence. It has no qualities. It has no definitions. It is no thing and therefore cannot be hurt. But because it is what it is, it's also always there. And it's also the most consistent part of our experience. So, for instance, how could we be our thoughts if our thoughts are always changing? There has to be something immediately prior to our thoughts that is always consistent, that is always there, watching the fluctuations of thinking. For instance, when you have a thought about what you're going to do tomorrow, and then you're done with that thought and it disappears, we don't feel like a part of ourselves disappeared. Because there was something immediately prior to that thought that was aware of it being there, which is who we are, our authentic, most core, essential essence. Same way with our body, it always changes. It grows older, it has all kinds of illnesses throughout its life, has all kinds of it even goes to sleep at night, but yet an awareness still remains, which we in the morning recall or describe as a dream. The awareness still is aware of things going on. In the daytime, we call it life. We're aware of life. At nighttime, we call it a dream. It's still that same aware presence that is just aware of objects of our experience, aware of the image of our experience. In the same way a dream is an image, our waking life is an image that we're looking at. And then there are parts of our night in which we do not remember because there are no objects there to remember. There's no image there to remember. That's called deep sleep, where awareness is just aware of itself. And there's nothing to remember there because there's no objects or images. But awareness is still aware. So our bodies, our thoughts, our emotions clearly, all these things change all the time, but there's one thing that is consistent, and it's the awareness of these experiences. So these are just examples of ways we can reason out to connect with this most authentic part of ourself that, when connected with, resolves all the challenges and ego and emotional problems in our lives. So it's just doing nothing, or stop trying to change and fix things. What are we left with then? We're left with what's right here. And if what's right here is unsatisfying, like say there's an emotion or a sensation that we want to get away from, then that want to get away from or to change that emotion is what's pulling our attention into the manifested form. And as such, got a problem to work out. But when we stop becoming so interested in changing or fixing emotion or sensation or feeling and allow that emotion, sensation, or feeling just to be there, then it withdraws our attention from the manifested form into the formless, aware presence that gives us perspective. And when that happens, what we were trying to change before, the emotion, begins to dissipate on its own. It begins to resolve itself. It doesn't need time to change. It just needs our aware presence.
The word forgiveness just appeared,
Totally.
and it occurred to me that when we draw away from the objects, when we draw away from the emotions, the feeling, the what's manifested, we draw away from that, all of the elements that prevented us from forgiving, or even ourselves, or certainly others, all those elements dissolve.
Yeah.
And they have no form. And so your perspective then is absolutely clear, instead of tainted or biased or
Yes.
assuming this is what's right or this is what's wrong. You're away from all of that, and the forgiveness is what's left.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me that maybe that might be a word to throw in for it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That brings to my attention another thing that's super helpful is, in order to get back to that space of aware presence, here's another tool. Imagine yourself as a baby lying in its crib. Now, this baby is not referring to thought. It is not referring to past or a future. So therefore, it has no context in which to be egoically wrapped up in its experience. And so when we're practicing this letting go, when we're practicing oscillating from changing and fixing things to not being so interested in changing and fixing things, then that can be a tool we can hold in mind, is the purity of a baby's aware presence. Yeah, Nicholas.
So, what you're saying makes sense. In concept, as far as the desire, to remove, I guess, a specific feeling or emotion that actually draws you to it. But I guess for me, the problem is that everything you're saying is it's more conceptual than something that I've been able to put into practice.
Totally.
So easier said than done, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. What would you say is the most important thing to you, Nicholas? Just in general, in life.
My daughter.
Your daughter, cool. What about for yourself? What would you say, or even with your daughter? What type of experience would you like to have with your daughter?
That's a complicated question. Some of what I shared with you earlier has to do specifically with that. You know what? Just being with her in general and teaching her things. She's 5 years old.
Yeah. Would you say that you would like love to be the primary experience with your daughter?
Yes, definitely.
Of course. And so when we find what is most important to us, what is most motivating, which is why I asked that, and it can be whatever it actually is for you, but most of us, we're interested in something like love with ourselves and with others. We're interested in mental and emotional freedom. We're interested in understanding compassionately. We're interested in peace, things like that. When it really comes down to it, those are the things that are most important to people. Happiness, those types of things. When we really discern that for ourselves, and it's the most clear thing to us that this is just what we want, then at that point, when we start moving in a particular direction that seems to be pulling us away from that love, then it's much more easy to make the choice to stay with love. Now, here's the next question is, what is love? Is it fair to say that what our thoughts usually do, besides being able to say the words "I love you," our thoughts usually go into what needs changed or what needs fixed here. So when we notice how our thoughts, when it goes into that, takes away from what we're wanting more than anything, which is that love, then we go into those thoughts less and stay right here. And when we stay right here, what I described becomes less conceptual and more experiential. And so it does take some time of just becoming really clear on what is most important to you and what does produce that thing that's most important to you. And so, and yes, you could say it does take some time. It does take some commitment to the practice. Absolutely, Nicholas. It does take some commitment to the practice. Love has to be the most important thing to you, or freedom, or peace, or whatever it is. And as such, slowly having experiences and then discerning, is that experience, is that direction I went really bringing me to that thing I want more than anything? And if it's not, naturally we will begin to let go of it.
I guess for me, to this point, the practice or the focus had mostly been just on, I don't know, centeredness or just clarity of mind in general, as opposed to, what you said, like love. I mean, those things are obviously things that I want and need, but I hadn't, focused on what you just said there to this point. Sorry about all the activity.
No, I don't care. Yeah, clarity. Good. That's the most important thing. Good. Then it's like, what produces the most clarity? Is it exploring the content of my thinking? Or, and if it is, fine, or after we have some experiences of being less interested in the content of our thinking and more experiences of staying with what I would describe clarity as just being right here, right now, then the content of our thinking becomes less interesting to us. And as such, stay with the clarity of aware presence. So at first, clarity might seem like in having the right perspective, meaning going into the content of our experience and discerning what would be the right perspective. And you could, traditionally, that would be the right definition of clarity. But whatever our right perspective we've come to is, we will always be limited by that perspective. And so when we see that no matter what perspective or conclusion we come to, we will always, no matter how clear it may seem at the traditional level, we will always be limited to it, and as such, isn't clarity at all. Then when we really see that, then we become less interested in content of our thinking and more interested in the clearness of just being here now, the clearness of just aware presence. That becomes more appealing to us. But we have to be committed to this practice. We have to be committed to really seeing that for ourselves. And it's a challenge at first, but it's very doable. Good question, man.
That makes sense, and I appreciate that. Yeah. I appreciate that response.
Cool. Okay, we have about 8 minutes left. Let's see here. Is there any other particular thoughts anyone would like to share, or questions or additions?
Practice is essential.
How would you say that you might go about practicing this, Mark?
I do not meditate enough.
Yeah.
I need to do that more. Being mindful is what I'm here to help learn, hopefully.
Perfect. And it really starts by just being alone and being unplugged. just for just a few minutes every day, just to simply practice meditating, which is the same thing as being aware. That's the essence of meditation, is you're just doing nothing, not trying to fix or change yourself, just being aware. That's meditation, which is being alone in most instances. It doesn't have to be like that in the future. You can totally be meditating while being around other people, even with your eyes open and engaging. But at first, it definitely seems to start that way, to where you need to be alone and you need to make deliberate time for it.
I wish I'd realized that earlier.
It wouldn't have worked earlier. You were learning something else earlier. It only would work for you now, because now you have the space in your life to consider other things. Prior to this point, you were considering other things that were more important in your development. There was no loss. It's perfect timing. Truly.
Mark, I'm shaking my head at you because I'm sitting here thinking, oh yeah, everything that Brian just said. And then I look at my picture and I'm looking at my white hair and I'm thinking, oh yeah.
I wish I'd started this sooner. You're funny.
I think that's so important to remember, though, because I think it goes into everything that you've been talking about, like being aware in this present moment and realizing that it's not something that we needed to fix or change, and that this is just the path that we're on. And so, I don't know, whenever you said that, it kind of, because Mark, I've thought similar things too, but it just kind of like takes that burden of pressure and like, I need to master this sooner rather than later off. And it's just more just realizing that the more that you just check in with yourself, the more you'll realize that it is what it is.
Which reminds me of, don't make this into the next amazing thing. Because although you want it, to make it into the next amazing thing is to put it at a distance from you. Because it's already here.
That's something else I wish I'd realized earlier.
So then why is detachment from that so natural?
Why is detachment from what so natural?
Well, you said, it's already here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, why is it, what we're talking about here is, why is that unnatural?
It starts when we're a kid. It starts when we're a baby. It starts when we start to grow up. And it's necessary for the formulation of a mental structure, which we often call the ego. But without a mental structure, there's no way we could blossom into the capacity that we have today. So the mental structure, of which now we're trying to detach from, was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to move through life and have the capacities that we do today. But to stay connected with that and to not detach, as you said, and remember ourselves as this aware presence, at a certain point becomes a dysfunction. If we're interested in a deeper sense of peace, if we're interested in the most authentic connection to ourselves, if we're interested in true clarity and understanding. But it's a necessary step in everyone's evolution. We need that structure of thinking. We need to know how to move in the world. We need to know how to go to school, how to work, how not to cross the road at the wrong time so we don't get hit by a car. We need to know how to not to eat poison. We need to know all kinds of things. And all that's in our structure of thinking. But the tendency is to only know that. And we're just learning how to oscillate to also being able to connect with our unmanifested formlessness.